crap. Good afternoon, friends. I'd like to welcome you today to What's in Tegan's Storage Locker. It's the show that dares to ask the question, just what is in my storage locker? And the answer this week is startlingly less than the week before. The scuttlebutt, which I have to admit knocked me for a bit of a loop, involved the bin being broken into. It was apparently just part of a smash and grab. I hit a number of units that were just broken into with brute force, and stuff more or less randomly taken because they didn't really touch the comic books. They're just sitting there. They're heavy. Thing is, I think there was one box they took, and it was the one box that I had organized sort of so far, and it was the Mark Bagley Spider-Man. If they just looked and saw that up front, have to admit, losing the first Carnage might sting if that's what it comes out to. And they took a couple other things, like just random personal stuff of no value whatsoever. And the one thing that actually kind of stings, I was perversely proud because I really loved the Marvel Famous Cover series. And I had just, I think, almost all of them up to the Diamond acquisition, at which point I just wasn't doing it anymore. I always thought, oh, in my 30s or something, I'll catch up, and that'll be something I buy at cons. And it's like, that didn't end up being what my 30s were like. So I haven't really thought about them much in the ensuing decades, but I love those toys. I loved them. They were great. They're not really remembered still as much as the Mego toys. And they were in some ways kind of a really decent take on the Mego concept. And they were at a higher price point, and they were kind of obviously, skewed towards collectors, and I loved them. I loved them. I saved up my allowance, and I got them all, and I was way too old to get excited about the toys, but I love those things. I have no idea whether they're worth any money or whether or not they're going to be sitting somewhere. Who knows? I have no idea. I do. So a couple things, really of, inconsequential value in the larger scheme of things, so there's no chance I'll ever see any of them again. That's just sort of how it is in these streets. And if you go and read the essay I wrote, which is up on my blog, which doesn't get a lot of traffic these days, but I wrote an essay about launching this channel, and it's up on I don't know if I've ever even mentioned it before, but I wrote an essay about the launching of this channel, and I put it up on my blog, the old When Will the Hurting Stop, after putting it out in my newsletter, because they ran in the first 5 issues of the newsletter. And it was basically about how I thought I had lost the storage unit altogether for years. It was just out of my life. No one was paying for it. We thought it was gone. And then they just showed up and just wanted me to pay all the back rent. They didn't understand why we had stopped. So, it was sort of a miracle in terms of the fact that it's been a financial burden. But it's not a financial burden that's necessarily unfamiliar in this day of age. It's just, a bill I pay. And now I'm trying to get some back on that because I got so many comic books. Man, even if they took some, it didn't really make that much of a dent. That's how many comic books I had. All right, so let's just start off, now that I've told you the hot goss, so to speak. I have to admit, that just, it came on the end of a very stressful week. So it was just kind of an intense period in general. So why don't we just get back into it and read some comic books and relax for an hour. Sit back, grab something to drink, pull up the solitaire game or whatever it is you're using for solitaire. These days, I'm a Snap player. So anyway, let's get started with Wetworks here. Let's read our worries away. So I was actually buying I don't know how long it lasted, but like issue 9, I was fairly committed to Wetworks. And I'll tell you, I don't understand a blasted thing that ever happened in this comic book. At a level I almost refused to try, and yet I couldn't look away. I respected it and I wanted to support it because it was so very much what it was. And I thought maybe at some point I would look back and have a chance to take it all of a piece, because it's really kind of on one level, it seems like a very contemporary concept, like just straight up. When you actually just take it and look at it, take it apart, it's like, oh, yeah, you have a team of cyborgs who all have this sort of metallic skin thing that gives them sort of, generic superpowers, I believe. And they fight supernatural stuff. They fight werewolves, and I think vampires too at some point. I don't really remember, because you're not, this was being, it's not on the front page. All the early Image books just put it on the inside front page. I just want the credits. Oh, just around the back. It's still, Whilce Portacio. His story, his pencils, his art in a spotlight. He's co-writing it with Francis Takanaga. Takanaga, sorry. Wasn't quite sure what that letter was because of the Sal Regla, Scott Williams. Oh, Scott Williams did 3 pages, but still. And Joe Chiodo, who was pretty ubiquitous at Wildstorm and Top Cow. Hello. And this little bugger here has actually been kind of quiet lately, because now I will say it hasn't been as cold as where I am as it has been in some parts of the country. It has been really cold, and it's rather taken the wind out of his sails. He's spending a lot of time under blankets. So, I'm trying to be more sympathetic towards him. He's very put upon as an animal, I believe. He seems to think so. He seems to really want to convince me that he is put upon in any event. All right, so this is 1995, but they're still pumping out the trading cards. Was anyone really paying that much attention to the trading cards at this point? Some of this could be work that hasn't been seen. I don't even know. But I just wasn't, they weren't a good use of my money at that point, because I was up saving for those famous covers by that point. Actually, I think Famous Covers debuted in 96 or 97. Had a good 2 or 3 years. It wasn't a long-lived line by any means. In case you're curious. Maybe someone's done I can't remember ever seeing a video on them, and I tend to, linger around those type of, easy to put on when you're doing the dishes sites. So it's just not a very talked about toy line. So it's just random stuff. Fantasy races. There's these. Oh, you want to see the fantasy races? Yeah, this is a straight up fantasy comic book. He heard me saying that he was being quiet, so now he's acting up on principle. Oh well. Here we go. Maybe a few pets will fob him off for the moment here, because we're into the business of reading Wetworks. And you're seeing, this is a real fantasy comic book. No BS. It's not smuggled through, superheroes necessarily. This is just... It kind of seems like something I would see in, a 12-episode shonen now that I'm, watching an inexplicable number of those. Okay. Sci-fi stuff, fighting fantasy. That doesn't seem that unusual. Anyway, using more explicitly fantasy elements. Spawn was fantasy, but, sort of a different lexicon, but very, the dark fantasy, so to speak. But this is werewolves. This is fantasy people. And then, here are your military guys who just show up blasting. They just come in blasting. I don't even remember enough to know if they have like all wooden or silver bullets for the werewolves. I don't know. I'm not like I say, my brain, it actively fought learning what was happening in this comic book. But I liked watching it do what it was doing. And this character, who is very visually distinctive, it was always fun to see her show up. Very much the type of thing you could imagine seeing in Cyberforce if the concept was maybe pushed a little bit further. Oddly enough, the cyber character that people remember that period would be the one that Alan Moore created in Wildcats. But it was, of this sort of genre, the deconstructed cyborg woman. And this blue guy who I have no idea what's happening. This doesn't look good. Oh, look at how distinctive this is. Look at how you can't imagine anyone drawing a page quite like that. It stood out in the 90s. If you look, I think there's a lot of Art Adams in here, but I think there's a lot of early Art Adams. He learned a lot from inking early Art Adams. How could he not? That was a very intensive assignment for everyone concerned. And you still see that, I think, even after Art Adams has outgrown some of those affectations. But Art Adams was all over all the Image guys. Go back and read the Asgardian annuals that Adams did, and you just see panel after panel after panel that would be nice, and we're saying recycled wholesale by many artists. Very influential stuff. But if anything, I think Portacio is a direct disciple. He worked with the man. He also worked with Rick Leonardi. Briefly. As an inker, I mean. So yeah, very interesting talent, even if maybe sometimes it does, like this. This is actually a great example. Does this work? Because your eye is led back here very effectively. There's nothing really to push you that. So maybe if the sound effect really just doesn't stand out here. I don't know if that's a consequence of poor printing or what. But see, this is just like some crazy stuff. This is like, Toonami at 12:30 when you're in a strange motel, just checking in on shows that you've seen like maybe 2 episodes of. That was more or less my commitment to anime, tuning into Toonami once in a while and seeing what was weird. But yeah, you just see these really interesting characters drawn. I mean, because, objectively speaking, it's a striking bunch. The gold skin, that's kind of unusual. That marks them out. Plus the cyborg parts. They got quite a profile. Now, like I said, I don't know if any of this, there's a werewolf. See, I told you there were werewolves. Let him go, freak. And I don't know if I'm necessarily compelled to go back and, put together my run and try to make sense of this. I don't know if that's happening anytime soon. But it's nice to flip through. I think you can see, though, how Portacio is also kind of, he's someone who actually works well with different inkers. He worked with Scott Williams, but he also worked with a number of other people and managed to keep a very consistent, distinctive look, to his work. That's interesting. That is an interesting spread right there. That's nice. Oh, it's sort of, not sort of, very Sienkiewicz, but like convincingly so. That is a striking page. Like, I have no idea I'm back. All right, Fang heads. Who's the one who punked Claymore? I've got a few words I'd like to impart on him. Also, next issue, this guy, I guess he's coming through a portal or coming out of a prison or something. I don't know. But he is going to get serious in the next issue of this comic book. Oh, and you get a pinup by Tim Bradstreet. what is this of? Oh, this must be an ancillary character or something. I don't have any idea who this is. Their skin isn't gold. This is a nice pinup. Oh, this is... No, because that's what this is. Harrington, Ribner, and Pennington. I don't have any idea what... Wow, like... This looks sort of like Kevin O'Neill had to draw an episode of early JoJo's. God, that is so precisely what this is. Weird. That's a weird vibe. That is a weird vibe. No idea what is going on there. I mean, it's kind of interesting if I run across that in a bin or sometime. What was the name of that? The lone one. Yeah, actually trying to do like a chaos comic at Image in 95. Kind of weird. But, that was the style at the time, wrapping the onion around your belt. All right, so you see an interesting looking comic book. I'm not going to argue for it being necessarily a buried treasure, but if you come across it, fun to flip through. All right, I got a good one. I don't know if I'll say it's a good comic because I remember it kind of frustrated me the first time around. But it's a gorgeous comic, even if I recall being kind of disappointed because they did hype this storyline a little bit. The Kingpin was going to be the villain in an X-Men book, and it was very novel at the time. Of course, now that seems kind of quaint because he's actually been in the X-Men books quite a bit lately. To interesting effect. I wouldn't have thought that maybe you could do a Kingpin joins the X-Men story, and yet here we are, and this is the first time they met. And this was actually the first time that this guy right here, Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu, who actually is pretty famous now because he had a movie that people didn't hate. I don't think it was a movie that too many people had strong opinions about either way, actually. I realized I gave up on the Marvel Cinematic Universe at some point. And because the thought of going back and catching up seems like rather a dim prospect at present. So I don't know. Maybe I'll just go back and find something that looks interesting one day when I'm feeling really anhedonic. So the reason we're looking at this isn't really Shang-Chi, because, like I said, this guy had been absent from comics for most of when I've been reading, at this point, which was a good, 8-9 years. He just had been gone, partly, I think, due to, I don't know if it was partly due to legal stuff, just not wanting to touch the licensing fees that they would have to use. But he just didn't appear very often. And this got a little bit of hype for, hey, Shang-Chi and Kingpin in an X-Men story, which, is actually an interesting hook. But I remember it being kind of a disappointing outcome. They sort of chumped Kingpin because, there was no way the X-Men were going to let the Kingpin of crime get the best of them. I thought they rather, ran rings around him, which... if you're going to put the Kingpin in an X-Men book, you got to at least make him a credible threat. But this is Carlos Pacheco. So that's why we're looking at it. Because it's Carlos Pacheco drawing the weirdo, feral Wolverine. Bet you, I'll be honest with me, I bet you haven't read too many comics with that Wolverine in it. Unless you're a freak. I'm sorry. That's one of those times where I'm happy to say, yes, that was 25 years ago. We can leave it. We're seeing that guy. We're seeing these guys drawn by one of the all-time greats with Art Thiebaud on inks. Pretty dependable, especially at this point. Lebdell plot, Rab script. That was also a pretty common sights in these books. And, in hindsight, this period, I liked the art on it. They never had bad artists. But it wore on me after a while. It wore on me. Oh, this is a nice 2 pages. Shang-Chi gets here, he climbs up these steps. We haven't seen him in a while, so we're just sort of getting a couple pages of him, having, some establishment in the book. And then, there's Ninja. For most people you'd be worried, but this is the master of Kung Fu, so it's probably not going to be too much of a challenge for him. Oh, and this football man, who is this? Oh, it's John Elway, that's who that is. Can't say I paid much attention to football in quite a while. I was in the habit of watching playoff baseball for a good few years there, and then, you move a couple times, you just lose track of what's going on. But that was something that I would not have enjoyed when I was a kid. When I was, of the prime X-Men age, I wasn't necessarily, hip to the, shall we say, the more mature pleasures. But, you get another couple of pages of Shang-Chi, basically just going to town on these really generic, they kind of look like the Ninjak from Valiant, actually. Same color scheme. And there's some Quesada in early Pacheco. The thing with Pacheco, though, is he was always, this is a late 90s video game ads, like Strike Again. This is at least slightly more coherent. Oh, wow, and that's him following his assignment. That's about as good as that character could look with that design, which, you see why they backtracked. You've already destroyed the arm of that chair. You don't need to rub it in. Oh, my goodness. This creature. So suddenly Wolverine is throwing feet as well. He's doing karate. He doesn't have his adamantium, so maybe he's a little bit lighter on his feet. I don't know. But his claws are still deadly. Oh, hello. He heard me saying that his claws are still deadly. Oh, yes, they are. Because it's impossible to cut these with only one person in the house. It's impossible to get his toes cut. It's a war. Speaking of which, Storm shows up to basically put an end to the conflict because, she can just zap everyone. And there's Cannonball, who didn't really do anything. Except maybe save that guy. Oh, save Shang-Chi. Wait a minute. So I guess Shang-Chi has never met Wolverine before? That's kind of weird if you think about it. Wolverine knows everyone from way back. You'd think he'd know Shang-Chi, but no. And not knowing who a guy with 3 claws is in 1996, man, you haven't been getting the newsletter. We're getting lots of shots of him looking good, though. I think they tried, I want to say they tried a very brief serial, I think, I want to say, in the Journey into Mystery anthology, which they were trying, but none of the serials really seemed to catch fire. But they did try with him again. He was just a character who did really well in the prime days of the newsstand. And, he was also kind of tied to a cultural moment in a lot of ways that it took a while for him to outgrow as well, at least in terms of, how Marvel sold him. I have no idea what's going on. I have no idea why they're fighting Shang-Chi. But they're in the fine commercial, apparently. I'm sorry. Are they? It looks like it. Oh, that's not great. It's just a big plane. Okay. That was funny, though, you have to admit. They're doing some, Star Trek view screen thing. Undoubtedly some, Asian organized crime stuff that will probably never be mentioned again. And you're bringing the X-Men into it, which, it's nice though, you have to admit, it's a very sharp looking comic book. He doesn't miss. He just doesn't miss. I try not to think about, being taken from us so soon. Because he just, from the very beginning, he was just that good. Just effortless. And for some reason, he deigned to draw, really not that great superhero comic books for a good percentage of his career. Eventually, he graduated to better material. But he did his time on some very regrettable stories, I must say. A number of artists did that in the 90s. That was just sort of what it was like. Maybe, the Joe Madureira run on X-Men. You don't have to read those word balloons too closely. I give you permission. But they're very fun-looking books. They are. They really are. So they're Sega Saturn. And how long did the Sega Saturn last? In my memory, it was around for like 5 minutes. But more people seem to have it. Someone's always going out and lamenting the Sega Saturn. And it didn't make any noise at the time. It's like, where were you the first time around? After my chair. So, maybe, I don't know, is this a follow-up on some of the stuff Claremont did? Because he sort of had, allusions to, Asian organized crime stuff towards the 80s, certainly in the Wolverine solo material he did. And in the X-Men as well. I mean, certainly the Acts of Vengeance storyline, by itself. But, it never really seemed to be much more than something they do every once in a while. 2 pages. Maybe we'll come back to that. My God, that is an ugly color for a Pen Bulletin's page. My eyes do not want to read that. So here's Wolverine. Just, man. God damn. No. Look at that. That's about as good as that can look. That's the one thing you can say about Carlos Pacheco. It's a terrible idea. You give it to him, he'll draw it as good as it can look. As good as it can look. He was one of those people, Perez, sometimes when he drew other people's designs, he could draw out their shortcomings, sort of. But Pacheco, just made everything look good. Even terrible, terrible costumes. And you notice that the Jim Lee costumes for Cyclops and Jean Grey, they haven't changed at all. They haven't been updated in any way, which is kind of an eternity for costumes as far as, the X-Men go. And 2 page, man, again, you want to talk about... This is just what they did. They had computers and they weren't afraid to use them. And it didn't matter if all of this, background stuff just made it hard to read. I remember, in Avengers, they did that so bad 1 month they had to reprint the letters page because they had to take an L in the letters column and say, we realized when that was printed, it was, illegible. So we're going to have to print those letters again. That's how bad it was. And they never really seemed to pull back on it that much. I don't recognize any of these names. Sebastian Shaw pursues an unholy path while one of Marvel's deadliest villains returns. Because Kingpin had been gone. Kingpin had been gone since Daredevil 300. That's a good 5 years. Think about that. They kept Kingpin more or less off the table for 5 years. From the more or less the beginning of the Dan Chichester run. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Up through this run on X-Men. And then he just came back and he never really left. Usually is just a supporting character in the book. But yeah, there was like 5 years where the Kingpin just wasn't in comics. And when they brought him back, people sort of were happy to see him again. So this is an ad for the... it's sort of an article. I would have probably loved this. Just a historically tinted promotional piece about the new Khazar book, which I bought because it started off with Mark Waid and Andy Kubert. And that was a pretty good creative team. And inexplicably, it looked pretty good for a Khazar book. And there's no reason Khazar has to look good. Like, even decent Khazar comic books don't have to look good. And yet, inexplicably, this run of comics looks very good. I still don't like the character. I like Shanna. I really like Shanna. If they gave Shanna monthly, I would buy it every month without fail. And yet, they've never tried with her. All right, so they're in the middle of the, in Uncanny, they're in the middle still of this space storyline, which was, one of their, every now and again, they take a team of X-Men and they send them to space for a year. They've done it a number of times. And, they get interesting stories about just, putting the X-Men through cosmic stories. And a part of the fan base complains, like, it's not really part of the core, the core problems of the book here. And yet people just sort of accept it. Oh, yes, I should never have underestimated the boy. But anyway, you see, that's nice stuff. Just a book about dinosaurs and a Khazar. Dinosaurs are cool. I'll read most comics with dinosaurs in them. So, the fact that it was Andy Kubert actually getting to draw dinosaurs, which, honestly was kind of as much of the draw as anything, if I remember the ads for this. It was just like, it was the 90s. Jurassic Park was big. They got a little tiny bit of juice out of a guy who could draw a credible dinosaur. It wasn't Tyrant. My God. Sometimes I just sit in a chair in an empty room and I stare into space for like 5 minutes, just thinking about what Tyrant could have been. I have to admit, it just seems like, oh man, give me 100 issues of that over just about any other comic that's ever been published. I'm old. Most of you don't even know what I'm talking about. Rifts, something else, do they still do Rifts? We've had a big RPG renaissance. I don't know if Rifts is still a thing. Oh, and the Incredible Hulk. Oh, the Pantheon Saga, which I think was the only bit of merchandise they did that ever featured any of these characters or concepts. Oddly enough, no one's ever used the Pantheon who wasn't, named Peter David. Well, let's just take a moment and indulge ourselves with an old issue of Who's Who. We looked at the X-Men. I'm sure the algorithm will like that. George Perez wasn't doing the covers anymore. I can't find the signature for this. I'm putting it on the screen right now. But it's Johnny Double through Kong. And, the character on the front flap is, Killer Frost she was big for like 5 minutes because she was in Crisis on Infinite Earths. But other than that, that's a weird character to put right up front. It must be sort of a dead stretch of the alphabet in terms of the real superstars. Because usually they put Batman or Superman right up front here. Johnny Double. There's Dennis Cowan. Bill Ray. That's an interesting combo, you have to admit. Dennis Cowan and Bill Ray. It sort of works. It comes out looking a little bit like Jim Valentino. They had a letters page where people were writing questions about all the entries and such. T.M. Maple letter. What does old T.M. Maple have to say? I've received an international plea for help, and being the responsible citizen of the world that I am, I couldn't refuse. Christopher Romano of Pacific Palisades, California, has asked me to lend my voice to his request for a Who's Who annual. We shortened your letter to the first paragraph since there's no need to explain the benefits in having an update. Instead of a Who's Who annual, what do you think of a Who's Who yearbook? We're already compiling lists of corrections and characters and added to be added. Okay, so there'd been, then they would have a couple of sequels. I don't think... No, I actually think they matched the original handbook blow for blow because they did them in the mid-90s and they did them a little bit later in a different... They did them in the mid-80s, the late 80s, early 90s. And in the early 90s, I think they both did. Did DC do the loose leaf format? They might have. I hated that loose leaf format. I just stopped buying them. I love the handbooks, but I stopped buying them. I couldn't ride with that. Here's Jor-El with Wayne Boring and Jerry Ordway, man. And that's, that's kind of the joy of this book, is they give you a little mini pinup with, interesting artists for a lot of the cases. They tried to get artists who were associated with the character, or, barring that, they got, some fun ringers. Jaime Hernandez did, I think just one, but it's a really nice looking one. Frank McLaughlin, I don't know if this is associated with the Judo Master character. That's just not a costume that I think has been used again. Oh, and here's the JLA as they existed more or less right on the eve of the Crisis on Infinite Earths, because you got at that time the brand new members. All right, her name is now considered a slur. Being completely serious here. But I don't know, actually, if they've changed that. I like the character is the thing. I always liked seeing her. She was kind of a fun character, and they didn't really do a lot with her afterwards. And Vibe, who was surprisingly prominent on the CW shows. He found an audience, strangely enough. Alongside this goober here, which actually makes sense. He worked in a low special effects environment, shall we say. The character's powers aren't that difficult to do correctly. Red Tornado and Vixen, I think she was one of the newer members. Oh, Snapper Carr, he's the guy who betrayed them to the Joker. Sarge Steele, who... Man, every comic book I've ever read that had Sarge Steele in it, I've just, blacked out. I don't know what else to tell you. And they even put Phantom Stranger in the back. Well, I don't think he never caucused with the group, but, he showed up enough when they needed him that I think I can't remember where they did that, but they did that officially at some point. So, it's Luke McDonnell, who is the Suicide Squad. Bill Ray. Oh, you see Bill Ray's name so much in the Marvel and DC books at this time. He was taking a lot of work. And that's how he learned to draw, by just drawing a bunch of really, whatever comics. And there are worse ways to teach yourself how to draw. Howard Bender and Roy Richardson. I don't know, maybe they did the Star Trek books too. I don't know. Because this is sort of similar to what you'd expect from this material in one of the official handbooks. So it's not necessarily like it's that different in terms of, you basically just get the history and what's in it. And, these technical diagrams, which aren't Elliot R. Brown, but the closest I've ever seen DC get. Elliot R. Brown was just sort of a secret weapon every now and again, Marvel in their, handbooks or whatever. It's just some fantastic drawing in a pre-digital age. Justice Society, Jerry Ordway. Oh, I love these guys. I love them. I never got into the Titans. I just never saw the point in them. But I love these guys. I love them all. Except that guy. Adult Robin, that's the worst superhero costume. That is my official nominee for the worst superhero costume of all time. I hate it. I hate it. I wish it didn't exist. And yet it does. I don't mind, this guy. Is that Pemberton? Star Spangled Kid, I think. I don't know. His stories weren't very good. Not like Dr. Midnight, the Spectre. Oh, the Spectre's Golden Age stuff is great. Great. If you want to read some good Golden Age stories, read the Spectre. Spectre was good. Spectre was good. I think I've already recommended those on this channel. I'm just a fan of the All-Star books in general, of the All-Star comics. That was the Justice Society's home title. And here's the Justice Society headquarters, and here's a picture of a building by Todd McFarlane. wow, and it's a damn nice picture of a building. Look at that. Look at that. You ain't never seen a building that nice. He can do the establishing shots when he wants to. J. Wilbur Wolfingham, who is not someone who shows up in the Superman books that much. Bob Smith. And here's a Jack Kirby piece for you. It's Calabac. He did, I think, all or most of the New Gods entries for this. He did a number of pieces, actually, I think, for different characters that he was associated with. So that's, every issue, I think, had something, at least by Kirby in it. So, him with Greg Theakston, so a very respectful 80s best work. Todd Smith, I don't know that character, from like 141 of Green Lantern. I'm never reading that comic book. If you ever catch me reading Green Lantern 141, you'll know I'm in distress. Oh, and here we go, Jack Kirby, Come ND. And, you get these, the thing is you look back and say, well, the handbook really just, it had the same information. They just presented it in a slightly less uptight fashion because they used the logos and they tried to get a nice, design out of it. Whereas, official handbook was just the facts. Give me the profile. Three-quarter turn. So, this is just all little, there's him close up. There's him with the dog dude, whose name escapes me. I haven't read all the KMNT. Even when I was buying the 70s, a lot of the 70s Kirby, that was the 70s Kirby it seemed like people actually wanted. I picked up a lot of the early 70s Kirby, pretty, for a song at the time. KMNT was already seemed to have people after it. Here's some dude from GI Combat 232. Canna's Secret Shadow Warrior. Joe Brzezowski and Bob Smith. I have no clue whether he's ever been used again. I'm not going to look. I could look. I'm not going to. Candor by Howard Bender and Bob Smith. That's a nice looking piece. You see these color holds, just are such an interesting design choice. They'd never do anything like this again. I can't imagine. Because these are just Murphy Anderson. You get just a little Murphy Anderson pinup of Kanjuro. A nice looking piece. With a weird looking dude who I don't think has ever really appeared in a story that is very good. And yet he never goes away. Oh, why don't you scream at me in the comments about all the great Kanjuro? And I'm not just saying like, all the 60s stuff is worth reading. It is pretty good. But come on, he's not like the high wattage villainy from that era. He just isn't. He's no Star Conqueror. Or Despero. Karate Kid by Steve Lytle, Larry Malstead. Katana by Jim Aparo, inking himself, of course. See what I mean? These are just fun to look through, even as just like little pinup books. And, there was a time where I would sit and I would read these cover to cover, and I would learn these things. And I, in many cases, cannot forget them. Early Dan Jurgens with Greg Theakston. So Jurgens sort of operating in a Kirby mold. That's not an usual move for him. The Key by Paris Cullins, Eduardo Barreto, and inks. And it kind of has a weird Kirby look to it as well. Interesting. That's a striking looking piece. A weird looking dude. Not someone man. Grant Morrison used him well, I have to admit. That was an effective story for the JLA in the late 90s. But that's like the only key story I can remember off the top of my head, which, the Kuns, everyone knows the Kuns. They're just, punching bags for people in the universe. Kid Devil, he's a Blue Devil supporting guy, so that's Alan Kupperberg and Bob Smith. Kid Eternity by Murphy Anderson. A weird character who would get even weirder. And I can see, because someone, Ann Nesenti, probably read this very same entry at some point, and maybe something just stuck in her mind, because Kid Eternity, just as soon as Vertigo was even like a vague idea, there was a Kid Eternity sort of, going into that space. It was a very early book in that genre that isn't necessarily discussed as much. I don't even have it. I've read it, I don't have it. There's Killer Frost by Al Milgrom, who did a lot of the early Firestorm stuff. Al Milgrom, I think he's someone who's appreciated more now than he used to be. It's very nice cartooning, sort of uncharacteristic for a lot of mainstream stuff, for keeping kind of a cartoony edge that, in hindsight, I definitely appreciate. George Perez, Kid Flash, never disappoints, ever, not once. He always shows up, gives it the A game, even with C+ material. Killer Moth by Tom Mandrake. Kyle Baker. Here's Kyle Baker drawing some like Black Hawk punching bags. There's some real, comics royalty right there. And he's just, this looks great, man. Kyle Baker, you don't see Kyle Baker in a lot of DC comics at this time. The King, Marshall Rogers, that's not a character anyone really would have cared about since Flash Comics #3. King Faraday, Carmine Infantino and Murphy Anderson. I think they actually use that character a fair amount, though. Oddly enough, maybe it just fits a niche. I don't know if anyone's ever used these guys. More Carmine Infantino and Joe Rubenstein. So he's working with Joe Rubenstein here, Murphy Anderson here. I don't know who those bozos are. I don't want to know. Here's our old pal Cobra. I told you this man is completely uninteresting in every way. Cole, so this Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, who drew the character quite a bit in Titans. I don't like Titans, but I understand Titans, I think. Alfredo Alcala, Kong the Untamed, not a, for when Anthro is busy, you got Kong. Kong the Untamed. And it tells you what the last thing that any of these people did. J. Wilbur Wolfenham was used in Action Comics in the 80s. The Justice Society of America will reteam the graphic novel coming early next year. See, they put a lot of pet work into this package. I never paid more than 50 cents for an issue of Who's Who. I'll tell you that. But I've enjoyed every issue. I need to put together a run. That's what I need to do. All right, what do we got? Oh, here's something fun. Captain America and the Falcon, number 222. This is a 35 center that I inexplicably paid like 25 cents for at a convention for some reason, because that's what I was all about, was digging through the quarter bins. I want to say it was a quarter bin, and for some reason, I just found a really decent reading set of 70s Captain America after Kirby, which is kind of an interesting run of the book to randomly fall into your possession at a young age. The Steve Gerber Captain America. It looms large in my head, even though Steve Gerber didn't actually end up writing the character for very long. It was an interesting run. He didn't stick around long enough, I think, to really get his legs with the character. And pretty soon, not too long after this, I think, J.M. DeMatteis was in the wings at some point here. And he was a stabilizing influence. And then, of course, after he had a pretty lengthy run, Mark Grunwald had an extraordinarily lengthy run. So Captain America went from being a book that kind of struggled with consistency through part of the 70s, and then just was enormously consistent for a remarkable amount of time. So this is an infamous cover. Just Abe Lincoln just decides he wants to smash Captain America. Boom. Do you need anything more with an Ernie Chan cover to sell that comic book? There you go. So you got Steve Gerber writing, Sal Buscema, John Tartaglia, and Mike Esposito as artists. George Russo's, I don't know if there's been an episode of this show that we haven't looked at a George Russo's comic book. He colored a lot of comic books over the decades. And he's coloring Captain America, and someone's trying to kill Cap with a VW bug. Which is, you have to admit, that's a pretty sweet splash page. The Falcon isn't on the cover, but he's still on the masthead, so to speak. He wouldn't share the book for that much longer, I don't think. Although I don't remember off the top of my head. So yeah, Captain America versus a car, drawn by Sal Buscema. That's pretty awesome, you have to admit. That's awesome. And it's just, he's trapped in a small apartment with a purple VW bug. That maybe there was more of Gerber in this than I gave credit to, because that's a very interesting setup right there. So he jumps out the window just like he did to escape the explosion at the beginning of Streets of Poison. The Adventures of Grit Boy. They're still selling grit. And they're really going upscale with these Slim Jim ads with Jack Davis art. I mean, Jack Davis was an extraordinarily popular artist. He wasn't necessarily, I don't know if I would say he was upscale, because like he did, movie posters and stuff. But he also did candy ads and Mad Magazine. An exciting offer for Earthlings. Official Star Wars fan club. This is dated 77, so man, bet that membership kit is worth some dosh. No joke. Oh, and here he's barely hanging on to the side of the building because he's letting the car blow up under him. And this woman comes out and yells at him, and he climbs in through her apartment. Oh, so we get to see Cap calling Jarvis, which is a staple of Cap stories. And there's Nick Fury on the phone. Lots of people talking on the phone. Oh, Park Rider by Nash. World's finest skateboards. Come on. Oh, but it turns out that was a spy. Well, it's Captain America. He's always running into spies. That's a nice... every time I look lately, I'm struck by the similarities between Sal Buscema and Jim Aparo. They seem very much kin in a way. I think they both got more interesting the further into their career they got. And they both spent their careers on a distillation of what they started with. And with Sal Buscema, it was John Buscema. And eventually he had to sort of outgrow John Buscema, and maybe at some point, I think I would swear, he reads Frank Miller. He picks up some things from Frank Miller. You read his Spectacular Spider-Man. Tell me he didn't read Frank Miller. And that's interesting. I don't think I've ever heard anyone point that out, but he outgrew the John in his style. And his last decade of comics that he penciled are far superior to his early work. And similarly with Jim Aparo. He started out very close in the shadow of Neil Adams, and it took him years to sort of grow into his own. Although he started off able to draw a comic, but he learned how to draw a comic much better as he went on. So I guess this is mid-period, not like early Sal Buscema, because he'd done work since the late 60s. What are you doing? Anyway, as I was saying, he'd been working since the late 60s. He finished the Kree-Skrull War. So, he had some Neil Adams in him as well, because, everyone for a generation had Neil Adams in him. But he outgrew those. He outgrew those influences. I really cherish his later work. I really do. I recommend it to everyone. Some of it's out of print. Everything's in print. And his run on Spectacular with James and Matisse, especially. Although the Conway stuff is good too. It's kind of different from the later stuff. It's just a solid run of comic books drawn by one of the best Spider-Man artists. Can't recommend it highly enough. And this isn't as, this is early, relatively speaking. Not early. He knows how to draw a comic really well. This is very competent, very readable, kind of dry. I mean, Captain America was often dry. Captain America was not dry when Jack Kirby did it in the 70s. So there's something I'm not paying attention. I'm sorry. I'm not ready to read a Steve Gerber comic book today. The Marvel explosion comes to television, and for once, they actually did. They had a live-action Spider-Man, and they had a live-action Hulk, and that didn't last very long. That had that stuck around for a surprising amount of time. I don't recognize any of these names. Pizzazz. Oh, Close Encounters of the Third Time, free trading cards. He experiences quite a shock. Even for Captain America, you have to admit that would be quite a shock. And he's freaked out. Like, when have you ever seen Cap with that look on his face? Like, he was not expecting that to happen. Strong arms. In hindsight, they were just preying on these poor boys, who wanted strong arms, karate, an Atlas body. With a single swipe of its arm, clang. Ooh, he knocks Cap into the ground. He's about to crush him with the lamppost. Man, he's just having to fight. He has to fight the Lincoln Monument. And, it's stone, so if he hits it with his shield long enough, he can dent it. He can get a chip out of it. It's not a living thing. It's not Lincoln. And Thor, he's dealing with some Twinkie madness over here. Man, someone asked Tom Brevoort on his Form Spring once, I want to say, or maybe in just an interview at some point, like, what are the chances of a Hostess reprint? And he said kind of prohibitive. And he didn't know how much of an audience there would be. Like, strike when the iron is hot, man. You're doing all that third-party licensing. People would come out for like all of these with artist credits. Yes, please. The time has come. Hostess is not a union shop. They will say yes to anything, I'm sure. Oh, and Jonathan Purton, he's got a obituary here. Stan's. It doesn't look like Stan's talking about anything that important. I mean, is he ever? I never went back to that book. Okay, are you upset that I didn't go back to that Bullpen Bulletins page from earlier? Because I'm not. Did we finish the comic? No, we didn't finish the comic. Oh, wow. Now Cap has to fight that guy next issue. Okay. I remember reading about these guys in the handbook before I read the comic books. These are weird characters for a Captain America comic book. Kind of fun. Not characters that have been used much in the intervening time, however. But, if you were ever wondering who could win in a fight between the Lincoln Memorial and Captain America, well, Captain America has an edge. And he's sad because he just had to kill Abraham Lincoln. And then he's got to fight that dude. Like, no thank you. Secret Agent Spy Scope. And here's who's that guy? Johnny Bench? I'm not that big of a baseball person. I don't recognize that name. Good hitting starts with the basics, keeping your eye on the ball and using the right bat. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's amazing how much of this comic was kept afloat with just like ads for, classified ads. This is essentially like, comics for sale, poems wanted, scams. But, yes, free booklet, see your muscles grow day by day. Sometimes you see Arnold Schwarzenegger in some of these old ads when he was no one. Oh man, every time I see one of these ads for the mail order to complete your set of the Treasury editions, oh man, it'd be a very selfish thing to go back in time if you had access to a time machine. All right, well, you heard my tale of woe. You're still with me, so hopefully wasn't too painful an experience. So check out the rest of the channel. I got a lot of videos. I just completed a 2 video set of looking at the Frank Miller Daredevil. This is video 30, I think, so there's a lot of videos. They're long, so you can just put them on in the background of your life and go about eating your dinner. Yes, that makes sense, right? I got enough of them. You can just put them on when you go to sleep. And if you want to support this channel, what you need to do is you need to go to the Patreon. And I'm putting the card for the Patreon up right now. I need the Patreon to get more popular if this show is going to ever become more frequent, or have enough viewers to support like early episodes going up on the Patreon. We really need to spread the word to all your friends about this lunatic woman talking about comic books and fighting with her cat online. Let's make a groundswell. Let's go viral with it. What else? What else is there? I have a big essay coming up on the journal. I don't think it's probably up by the time that you're hearing this, if you're watching this in the first couple days. But I'm looking forward to it at least. What else? That's on the Comics Journal's website. You can usually find something of mine on the front page there at any given time. And tons of excellent other writing as well. They publish a lot better writers than me, but they are kind enough to publish what I send them. Check out my daily comic book reviews on Instagram and TikTok. Tegan reads a comic book. I just talk about a different comic book every day. They're scripted. They take, I sit down, maybe takes about half hour, 45 minutes to write the script, about 15 minutes to, I know this is on a good day if I'm not being disrupted by a certain someone. But, if I'm being a disciplined worker, it takes about an hour to make a video. And I've been doing them for 400 daily videos, so there's a big backlog. You can just put me on and go about the rest of your life, because that's what media is all about now. You just want to have a reassuring voice speaking to you in the background. I can do that. I'm not particularly that reassuring to myself, but I can be reassuring for you. Check out my podcast with Claire Napier, Udder Madness. I just put up a new video annotation on our YouTube channel here. It's about the darkness, and it's our podcast accompanied by the art that we're discussing at that moment on the screen, along with, covers and other weird stuff that I find sitting around here and there. You can probably find them just a click away. And of course, you can check out our Patreon. We're on Spotify. We're on SoundCloud, I think. We're everywhere you want to be. And what else? Just have a wonderful day, please. I had kind of a crummy week the other week, so I'm trying my very best to just have some very low-stress days here. So, be nice to yourself. Be nice to everyone you meet, small animals and small children especially. It's a hard world, and they deserve all the support we can get. Please, be well.